Hi, I'm R.L. Parker, epic fantasy and dark fantasy author. Today I figured I would do a quick little video, may not be quick, we'll find out, about using role-playing games like Dungeons & Dragons, Rollmaster, Rift, any of the, I'm naming the old classics, but using those games and your playing experience in them to enhance your ability to write. Because in my opinion, that was the foundation for pretty much everything as far as the way I handle my characters, my stories, and transition from scenes and all of that. The rest of the writing process comes from your ability to do whatever world building or research is necessary, and then phrasing a story. Right, but for me, all of my storytelling that goes into my writing is based upon my characters. So the critical skill there that usually needs to be honed is empathy, right? Being able to empathize with a person that is living a different life than you, has a different background than you, and being able to understand their motivations without implanting your perceptions onto them, right? Without, trying to decide, well, why did they do that? Well, they did that because, they feel this way. That might be the way you would feel to do that thing, not necessarily the way they would. So one of the things that I learned fairly quickly with role-playing games, playing characters that didn't necessarily align with me, was that, at the beginning it was usually a little hard to get into their frame of mind. Right? It's too easy to play a character that's supposed to be neutral, for example, as somebody you would normally describe as a good person. It can be too easy to fall into that trap of, well, they're neutral. That means they're not that good, which means, every now and then they're going to be a little dark, and then you take it too far. In my mind, it was always easier, and it felt a little more real and accurate if I instead tried to think of, how they would see the world based on what their past was and based on what their current experiences are. So if you take say my first character, right, a ranger mage, and he's an elf. So if you take that first character and look at the past that I gave him at the time, and I'm trying to recall something that happened 30 years ago, so bear with me. But if I remember correctly, he had parental issues where, his father died in a war, and then his mother, didn't have the means to, support the family. And so she ended up leaving their elven society and going out on the road, which is where he kind of grew his attachment to the outdoors and nature. But in that process, she ended up getting, injured and killed. And, he ended up getting transitioned into, the care of different humans that were around at the time and bouncing from one human civilization to another. And, he just had clearly a rough childhood. It's not like medieval worlds are known for their foster care, right? And if we think our foster care is rough here in the real world, imagine back in medieval times. So, whenever he went into a situation where he was trying to deal with, something in the parties, interpersonal relationships, or, any NPC that they were interacting with that, was more of a father figure, he had issues. It was either, he would get too attached to that person and, give him too much of a benefit of a doubt, or, which ended up him getting taken advantage of. Or he would be, apprehensive about it because he never wasn't with his father long enough to have an understanding of what that level of trust really was. Didn't know how to draw those boundaries and didn't know how to accept certain types of help that people were trying to give him. So for him, on a personality level, that's where most of his conflict came from, right? It was interpersonal dealings and working with NPCs. Now, that was similar enough to some, I didn't have the same past, but some of the ways he felt were similar enough to the way that I felt coming out of my childhood that it was easier for me to roleplay him. It wasn't too long, though, that I ended up in a campaign where all of the other players wanted to play an evil campaign. And, there are some of those groups where, the players just want to do the most vile, vicious stuff they can, just like it's a slasher movie. And those can be fun. But in this case, they wanted to try and play it legitimately as an evil campaign of, you got these people that by the world are considered evil, and by their actions, by the standard societal moral compass would be considered evil, but they don't necessarily consider themselves evil, because most evil people really don't. They are either disassociated from what we would consider, moral in a given situation, or they have a justification for doing it that makes sense to them. There are a few people in human history that have, broken that and take it, much further, and could definitely, I think, unanimously be considered evil. But that's not the common thing, right? Usually evil is, our definition of evil is based on our perception of what they did, of the actions they take, and of the aftermath of those things. So, in that campaign, the challenge was getting into that frame of mind for me and trying to think like that person in those moments, right? Trying to not just, not just take the surface level of, oh, he's evil, so he would X. No, I wanted to know why. Would he actually do that? Would his motivations actually lead him there? And all that to say that, as I went through these different campaigns with different characters, I tried to always give them something different than the last character. I didn't get a lot of times to play as a player. Most of mine was dungeon mastering. So that gave me a lot more room once I started that to flex those skills and to learn those techniques, because I would be interacting with a party and, they're maybe in a bar, and they've got, the bartender, maybe a serving wench, or, just different NPCs that are around them. Some are good, some are evil, some are neutral, and they all have completely different motivations. I wasn't one of those DMs that would plop you into a tavern and be like, there's a bar fight. I wanted to know why the bar fight was happening, right? What was the motivation behind the bar fight? And I would play some of that out in front of the characters so they knew why the bar fight was starting, right? It wasn't just two guys that just started fighting off in the distance. They would hear arguing first. And in my head, I was trying to give each person in that conflict a personality. Maybe one's Bob and Tom, just to use random names, and maybe Bob, slept with Tom's wife, right? Always something, even if it's simple, just some motivation. And in those situations when they would start overhearing the argument, if one of the players said, hey, I want to listen more closely, and they roll their little checks, roll their dice to see if they can clearly hear. And then it became, I'm role-playing Bob and Tom against each other and having to actually come up with what they're saying and have it make sense and have it feel passionate and have it feel realistic, so that the players get sucked more into the world. The players got sucked more into that situation. And we could have a whole evening where all it was that bar fight, because it became such a big deal because the players were so invested that the whole main quest gets put off to the side and they have to go and find out what happened between Bob and Tom now, right? They have to stop the fight. They've got to help these guys find a resolution because some player in the party, their character got emotionally affected by what was happening, and that became the focus, right? I had a tendency to do that kind of thing all the time, but in my mind, it was, yes, it was about the storytelling for my players, but it was also a chance for me to explore the varying emotions at all times and learn how to break free of my isolated mindset, right? Everybody has this, a certain way that they think and a certain way that they feel based on how they grew up. When I was young, I had a really hard time figuring out what happy felt like, right? Figuring out what healthy relationships felt like. So I used role-playing, outside of my personal interactions with friends and family and the people I was dating at the time and what have you. I actually used role-playing to flex a little more of that and see what felt right and see what felt realistic and get feedback from the players and just go through it that way. So to me, the role-playing helped me to empathize a little more. It helped me to, remain objective with people at first and then try to understand things from their point of view, which helps in a business sense. But it also, when I transitioned into dungeon mastering, it actually helped me with writing because, or further than that, because when I get into writing scenes where I'm, I've got NPCs in a bar fight, for example, I can have all those motivations in my head that just pop up and they feel real and they feel right in the moment. And, I know how the characters will respond, my main cast, because I have a personality for each one of them. And switching gears rapid fire while I'm typing quickly, because I type really quickly, is much easier because I got used to switching gears like that when I was doing dungeon mastering. I got used to switching in and out of personalities and coming up with minor little inconsequential plots on the fly. And, as I said in one of the other videos, coming up with whole terrains and world building on the fly. I honed those skills through role-playing, and I feel like they really helped me. So I've talked to a couple of authors on Twitter and Discord and some other venues where, their biggest concern was that they didn't understand how to think like a certain person, or how to, one guy was like, I've never had a long-term relationship. I don't know how to voice that in a character, but I've got a character I want to write that's married. And it's one thing to say, well, write what you know, right? This is the generic advice they give everybody. But it's another to give him some ideas that he can work with. Create a character that's married or in a long-term relationship in a role-playing game, and host a role-playing game if you can't find one to join. And role-play it. And when it starts clicking and feeling natural, that's when you're onto something. And you can gauge your level of success by the response of the people around you, right? You're playtesting. Right? You are playtesting character profiles that you're going to end up using when you write. So for him, that seemed to help. So I'm not saying that every author has to go out and do that, but I have talked to authors where this has worked and helped, and I know that it has completely empowered me to do the writing that I do, because my stories are very character driven. So if I don't know what characters are in a story, I stall out and I can't write anything. Right? If I get to a scene where I just for some reason hit a brick wall, my form of writer's block is I can't decide who that is. And once I decide who that is, I'm off to the races again. So keep that in your back burner. If you are an aspiring author or an author and are looking for tips and ways to maybe flex the writing skills without necessarily putting pen to paper yet, consider role-playing games if you haven't yet. And if you have, maybe use role-playing games to break yourself out of a mold, right? Don't just be that person that just constantly joins murder hobo campaigns, which are fun, I'll grant you. But don't just join the same type of campaigns all the time, run the same type of characters all the time, run the same personality even though your character is different. I see a lot of people that do that, and I grant you that they're having fun, but that's not necessarily going to flex your writing skills. It might give you stories that you can use, but it's not necessarily flexing your writing skills. So a little tidbit from me to you. Take it or leave it. And make sure to like and subscribe, and have a great day.